They say that near the old Quiapo Church in Manila, after evening prayers and official bells finish, another bell sometimes rings. A seventh toll, unrecorded, yet piercing the night. One sweltering evening, as the city simmered, the individual lingered near the ancient walls. 6 familiar tolls marked the hour. Then, just as the last vibration faded, a seventh distinct clang cut through the humid air. Softer perhaps, but undeniably present. A solitary sound, no one else seemed to notice. The individual scanned the plaza, their pulse quickening as a prickle of unease climbed their spine. As the crowd thinned, the individual spotted it. A figure, tall and slender, stood by a vendor's cart. Its face was nondescript, features blurring at the edges, yet the pressure of its focus felt suffocating. The individual turned away, blaming the humidity. But across the bustling plaza the figure stood again, watching from the periphery. The same blank features, the same unsettling stillness. For a heart-stopping beat, the reflection hesitated, a fraction of a second behind, before mirroring the motion. The city outside suddenly felt like a map of a place they had never truly known. The following afternoon, a mundane moment turned misregistered. The individual navigated the crowded streets, the cacophony of Manila filling their ears, when their phone slipped from their grip. It spun through the air, catching the harsh sunlight, heading straight for the grimy pavement. The individual braced for the familiar sound of splintering glass. Instead, the screen struck the concrete with a faint, delicate tap. With a sharp crack, it fragmented not into random shrapnel, but into a series of perfectly interlocking geometric shapes. Precise, sharp triangles, forming a flawless, spinning hexagon. It defied every known law of physics. The individual's throat constricted. They looked up, scanning the blur of faces for an anchor, a sense of logic. There it was again. Far across the street, near a jeepney stop, stood the figure. Its silhouette was jagged, a dark void against the colorful chaos of traffic. Even from that distance, the individual felt the heavy weight of its focus. The persistent appearances had begun to fray the individual's nerves, but the physical environment soon followed suit. Within the safety of their dwelling, the way light moved across a room felt wrong. The shadows it cast started to linger, just for a few seconds. A chair's shadow would hold its form even as the sunlight shifted, clinging to the wall, as if unwilling to let go. These shadows were not following the sun. They were moving independently, stretching toward the corners of the room. Desperate to escape the encroaching sensation, the individual booked a flight, putting thousands of miles between themselves and Manila. Stepping out of a foreign airport, a sense of fragile relief flickered. They walked into a crowded plaza, surrounded by new languages. Then the flow of the crowd parted. There, standing motionless, was the figure. It had not followed them. It had simply been waiting. How it occupied this new space didn't matter. The misaligned world had become a constant routine, and the distance they had sought was nothing more. The individual tried to fight back, to sever the invisible cord, tightening around their life. They found a small, unassuming souvenir charm, bought in a moment of distraction near Quiapo Church, and with a surge of desperate hope, tossed it into a street-side incinerator. As their hand recoiled from the heat, a searing, corrupted chill bloomed on their palm. There, beneath the skin, a thin, distinct line began to form. It was a blackened vein, pulsing faintly like an agitated, trapped parasite, slowly tracing an ominous path from the center of the palm toward the wrist. It was a brand. The escalation didn't stop at the skin. Days later, a close associate, someone whose company had always been a comfort, regarded the individual with a vacant, glassy stare. There was a hollow distance in their eyes. When pressed, the associate only mumbled about a feeling of static, their voice flat, devoid of its usual warmth. It was a social amputation, cold and clinical. The individual felt it. The blackened vein on their hand pulsed in rhythm, with a sound that only the individual could feel, promising something far more invasive. Seeking relief, the individual visited a medical clinic. They showed the physician the black branching line and spoke of the persistent figure, trying to convey the pervasive, crushing dread. The physician, after a sterile examination, offered only a dismissive nod. Stress-induced, they concluded, their words clinical and detached, psychosomatic. Try to regulate your sleep. A wave of icy frustration washed over the individual. Their pleas were met with an institutional blankness. Their reality was being displaced. In the waiting room, an old radio hummed a familiar, mundane melody. Then the sound began to shift. The cheerful notes frayed at the edges, static blooming into a corrupted hiss. The melody warped, stretching, then twisting into a low, resonant rhythm. It wasn't music anymore. It was a guttural, rhythmic pulsing. It carried the same cadence as the bells, echoing inside the skull, rather than through the air. Even here, in a place of, the individual started noticing the distortion in every reflective surface. Storefront windows, the polished chrome of cars, even rain-slicked puddles. Their reflection began to shift. A faint, unfamiliar smirk would play across their lips, or their shoulders would slump into a posture utterly foreign, almost predatory. It wasn't a trick of the light. The face, staring back, held an expression that wasn't theirs, containing a flicker of something ancient and hungry. This betrayal of their own image began to hollow out their sense of self. Then, the world outside began to mirror this internal decay. An acquaintance, a familiar face from the daily commute, grew distant, eyes darting with sudden, sharp paranoia. "People say they can hear whispers around you," the acquaintance stammered, pulling away. "Bad feelings. Like something dark is clinging." The individual heard nothing but the growing, ringing silence of their own isolation. They saw no shadow, but others evidently did. It turned once friendly. Moments began to vanish. Entire hours spent at work or sitting at home were lost, leaving the individual waking up in different rooms with no memory of how they arrived. Acquaintances became faint, distorted echoes in the back of their mind. Staring at photographs, the individual felt a chilling, profound disconnect, wondering who those smiling people were. Their own life story was becoming a frayed, tattered thing, full of gaps and bewildering, dark contradictions. The walls of their dwelling, once merely damp, now wept with a relentless, persistent intrusion. Patches of mold began to bloom, forming intricate, deliberate fractal patterns. They pulsed with an eerie, sickly light, seeming to shift when not directly observed. These patterns stretched, consuming paint and plaster, crawling across ceilings with a hungry, silent grace. Persistent, localized pockets of moisture gathered in corners, creating small, dark pools that never evaporated. The floorboards softened underfoot, and small, unseen trickles of water. The familiar streets, once a comforting grid, began to betray the individual in insidious ways. What used to be a simple walk to the store now felt like navigating a shifting, fever dream labyrinth. The path would stretch or twist into dead ends that simply weren't there moments before. Every turn became a gamble. Landmarks were subtly wrong, like gazing at a distorted, aged photograph of a place known intimately. Buildings leaned at misaligned, gravity-defying angles. Alleys narrowed into impassable stone walls. The air itself felt thick, putting a heavy pressure on the inner ear that made every step a journey into the void. The figure, meanwhile, defied every law of space. It would appear at the end of a long, distorted street, yet simultaneously be visible in the reflection of a shop window, right beside the individual. A flicker in a distant alley, then a shadowed form materializing inside a locked, empty doorway. A space. The black stain on their forearm had consumed the skin, a network of dark veins branching across their hand like ink, slowly claiming the flesh. The individual barely recognized their own dwelling. What had once been plaster and paint now shifted, almost breathing, into rough-hewn, damp stone. The geometric mold, vibrant and sickly, was now the very fabric of the walls, throbbing with an unseen, unnatural life. From the floorboards, uneven, slick cobblestones emerged. Elements of Quiapo's architecture manifested spontaneously. A faded market stall stood where a sofa had been, its empty shelves echoing with the ghosts of forgotten shouts. A wrought iron gate, like those guarding the dark alleyways near the church, now separated the kitchen from the bedroom. The personal sanctuary had been utterly consumed, merged into the nightmare the individual carried within. They were no longer a resident of a home. They were a guest in a fragmented, living piece of Quiapo, brought indoors, growing and feeding. The boundaries between their reality and the street outside had been eradicated. They were now merely a resident of a displaced, the individual's physical form became a tapestry woven from shadows and something colder. The blackened network, which had begun as subtle veins, completed its work, consuming every inch of the body, their features flattened and reshaped, becoming a seamless, perfect replica of the entity that had hunted them. The original person was fading, their essence siphoned away into a vacant, patient shell. A hollow entity now occupied the transformed dwelling, drifting through the decaying rooms with a fluid, misaligned grace. It rearranged furniture that wasn't really there, tracing patterns on the dust-covered surfaces with long, pale fingers. The eyes, once windows to a soul, were now simply dark, reflective voids that held nothing but a vast, patient emptiness. If you ever found yourself near that silent, altered house, and listened with desperate intensity, you might catch it. A faint, distant sound emanated from within the walls, or perhaps from within the air itself. It did not echo from the church, nor from the tolling did not stop. It simply waited for the next listener to recognize the rhythm, leaving a chilling vibration that hung in the air long after the silence returned. Equals 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 equals